Okay, everyone, welcome back from the networking break. It's always encouraging when you do get a full room again after the first networking break, or else you take it very, very personally. After lunch is the other big test. Right, we move on to our next panel discussion. That is the Supply Chain Strategy Forum, and I'm delighted to introduce my two guests. First of all, we have Alex Chencher, Head of Supply Chain Excellence and Head of Strategy, Supply Chain Logistics at Siemens, and we have Michael Carson, Partner and Head of Supply Chain Logistics Advisory, DMIR at Cushman and Wakefield. A round of applause for both of them, please. You know the drill by now. We have our initial chat, and then I will come to the room for questions later on, and we can send the microphone round. And if you are watching as a virtual delegate, make sure you get your questions in, and I'll get through as many of those as I can as well. Good afternoon, as it is now. Thank you very much for joining us at Procurement and Supply Chain Live London 2023, which is as big a mouthful as your collective job titles put together. So thank you very much for joining us, and I'll start with the biggest, most open question I can is, for both of you, how do you define a supply chain strategy? What is it in a nutshell for you? Alex, after you.
Okay, good. Hello everyone. Great being here. Thanks for the nice introduction. I'm going to be using your help to pronounce and giving my name and my titles to my boss also. That would be good. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about strategy. What is strategy for us? And I don't want to extend too much, but when we look on supply chain as an organization, what we typically have is a very, very strong tactical-driven organization. We go on, we get problems, we solve problems every single day. Whether this is on the part where we're going to be sourcing or we're going to deliver, or you have your factories in providing. So for us, the strategy is the move from a very tactical organization to a strategic organization. How do we do this? And then just very quickly, it's like we have to understand that there's always people, processes, and culture behind that. So strategy for us is a very strong people and culture-driven activity. I think we're going to go a little bit more in detail, so just like as a first quick feedback on your question.
Sure. Michael.
Great, thank you. And is that mic working?
It is, yes.
Perfect, yeah, great. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. Thanks for having us. Strategy, just building on Alex's point, I think, for me, there's three key components to, or three areas to focus on for strategy. I think from a supply chain perspective, first and foremost, the supply chain is there to service the business. So building a strategy from a supply chain perspective that meets the goals and the objectives of the business goal, business objective. I think within that, how do we manage risk? How do we balance risk? How do we manage cost? How do we optimize across the end-to-end supply chain? So I think, strategy for me, encompasses a number of components, and finally, sitting in on the session this morning on sustainability, I think that for me is a key component these days. As Maureen mentioned earlier at Beringa, we used to be cost, service, quality was the three components. We're now talking about sustainability as a key metric in there as well. So I think strategy is as Alex says, is taking that operational, tactical components and raising them up to where are we going? How are we? What's the anchor point that we're aiming for across those key areas?
Because when you're looking at a strategy, obviously you want your strategy to be successful, and you've got to be very honest with yourselves to look at if it's being effective or not. What I want to look at is red flags. How do you actually go about looking at a strategy and find things that are working, but also being humble enough to find out which things aren't working?
Okay, let me start on this, and I think it all starts with self-understanding. So if we say strategy is planning how to win in the future, and if we consider ourselves as a functional organization, this means we have in some kind of way first to follow the business strategy. So there is, in my case, there is a business strategy which defines the general direction. So now the next step that comes in for me is, what I can do to facilitate, to support, even to make sure that this business strategy is going to happen. I'm going to lose my earpiece here. I'm sorry for that. So what can I do to make that strategy happen? And that's the point where I transfer from the classical business strategy into my supply chain strategy. So that's the one thing. The other thing for us, and I'm going to share some insights tomorrow, also just to make some advertisement for my for my talk tomorrow, is we created something where we connect our strategy to what is happening on the market, which gives us a continuous feedback loop and allowing us really to look on things. And I call this trying not only to do things right, because that's what typically my organization or supply chain in total is doing, but really to do the right things. And that's where we would get, for example, the red flags. That's where we would see, like, it doesn't make sense to do this, and that's where we can raise our hands.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah. Cool, thanks, Alex. I think just building on that, I think you've got to be honest with yourself as well. I think creating things like digital twins, creating visibility across the supply chain, inevitably gives you that visibility. But I think it's being honest to then act on those findings, those red flags. As humans, without going into a psychology lesson, we're preconditioned to see what we want to see in many senses. And I think we've got to you've got to challenge yourself when there are those red flags. Really get under the skin of what's causing those, understand them, accept them, acknowledge them, and be honest and come up with pragmatic solutions to address them really.
And if we've talked about red flags, let's look at a green flag's a thing. They are now. How do you know when a strategy is in place that it's working, that it's actually hitting the goals that you wanted to hit? What signs do you look for?
Yeah, I think for me, linking back to my earlier point, I think meeting the business objective. Ultimately, the common denominator typically in businesses is financial performance, be that cost, be that profit, whatever the metric is, be that sustainability. The metrics we put around that. I think when the business is achieving what it's seeking to do from a service perspective, from a cost, sustainability, that's your green flag, I guess. Sadly, nobody generally raises the green flag. It's when the red flag comes that people start to panic. But yeah, I think it's that alignment. I think in many senses, it's when there isn't much noise. I think is the reality. But yeah, I don't know if Alex.
No, I like that point. I wanna twist that a little bit and say can a strategy so directly be measured that you can see it is effective, yes or no? Yes, you can do this on a very high level. So I can say okay, profit, best in place is going to be maybe beating competition, maybe some kind of strategies you have heard. But overall, if you look on that, it's more about, from my point of view, about the activities. What is that what we plan? Why do we plan this? How do we do this? And does the things make sense? So when this all comes together, we typically support the business, which is then relating in whether this is growth or your profit or your cost position or whatever is driving you in your businesses. So I'm a little bit on the other side saying, hey, let's just put that on a piece of paper. We're going to check this in 5 years from now. We're going to tick this off, and we have achieved what we have planned. I think when we look on the world right now, with the evolving situations that we get day by day, I think it's no longer the right way to do it this way, from my point of view.
Okay, one key theme that's already been emerging through the conversations today is a question of balance. This morning, a lot of the conversations are about balancing financial performance with sustainability or so on. So let's return to that idea of balance. For you, how can companies maintain the balance between optimizing costs and risk mitigation? That's a very rueful smile that's coming out for it.
Yeah. Did you get a solution? Let me know.
Yeah, I wish I did.
If you had a solution, we could all go home.
Absolutely, yeah, that's it, job done. I love the topic of balance. I always talk about it with clients when it comes to strategy, because never more so than now is that balance ever more complicated. There are more things to balance in supply chains than there ever has been. So I love that topic. I wish I loved it as much or sufficiently to have an answer to it. But I think one of the key things on that balance is a bit like a maths equation. It's getting a common denominator that you can then enable yourselves to visualize that balance. So if we take risk, for example, what's the cost if something happens? What's the true impact to the business? And therefore, when we're looking at procurement strategies, for example, yes, simple example, but the cost of the product may be more expensive. However, we've diversified our sourcing strategy. Therefore, we've given ourselves options. So for me, it's creating a common denominator by which we can then measure things comparatively, I guess. But not easy.
No, I think this is what you guys have on your desk daily, right? It's going to be costs, it's going to be performance, it's going to be risk mitigation in any kind of way. There's a big thing or a big topic where we're working on. We mentioned this before. Is really the topic of culture change, and really getting transparency about decisions and impact of decisions. I want to give an example. I don't know from your side who is really involved in electronical parts, but we all know this is a critical part. It's on a critical path. We have an issue with resources worldwide. So what typically kicks in is panic, right? So whatever you find something on the market, you're going to try to buy it. Like my company, I have product system and service business. So we're going to buy whatever we get. This creates a ripple in the market, right? Even if we don't know it right, don't need it right now, we're going to buy it. So the second thing is going to be raising my inventories. So my whole commercial organization is going to go crazy about that and going to say like, hey, you're creating more and more costs. Are you sure that we're going to use that inventory? What is going to happen? So the next step that comes in is that we, of course, create challenges in ensuring that material, making sure that the material has the standards that we want to have. So what we're trying to do is visualize that. What we're trying to do is using, for example, digitalization or automation, even a little bit artificial intelligence. We're very cautious right now with artificial intelligence, but still trying to implement that and getting transparency about the levels of decisions that's going to happen. And based on this helps you then to make the right steps in regards to risk management or in regards to performance or cost pressure. And I think everyone who has a relation to procurement knows that this daily pressure that comes in, we need it like 10, 15% cheaper. We need to make that much savings out of the project contract or whatever. So the pressure is already there. I think you can only tackle this with cultural change and transparency.
There's two things there, Alex, I did want to pick up on later, but you've brought them up.
No, I'm sorry. Yeah,
you've set me up beautifully, so I'm not going to complain at all. And you've mentioned culture twice, so let's look into that. And it's a key question. How do you create a right culture? And it's a how long is a piece of string kind of question. Everyone wants a great culture within a business or within a strategy they're trying to deliver. What advice, what wisdom do you have of actually trying to build that kind of question? And I apologise for the question in advance because it's almost impossible.
No, good. You want me sent up front, or you want to start?
I'll follow you.
Yeah, oh, fantastic.
Yeah. You're welcome.
I take the lead. Okay, thank you. But there's no general solution. Still, when we go in understanding of culture, of course, every company has a culture. This culture has been, by evolution, generated. It's there. So first thing is always understanding this. Second thing is, what I said before, is like the topic of transparency, of repetition. I'm always saying this. I learned the language by repetition. You're gonna learn changes by repetition. Making things prominent and visible, and also openly question topics. I want to drop in a quick example on that. It's a personal example, but I think it's going to be an interesting one for you guys. As at least my organization, my members of the board, they're continuously talking about resilience. We need to be more resilient because the markets are changing, the markets give us pressure, we have challenges, so we should be resilient. I don't believe in resilience, quite honestly. Brace for impact is a situation where you have to be reacting in one moment in time, just to quote Whitney Houston. Everything else needs to be going in the direction and saying like, hey, you want to be resistant or robust. Personal example. I'm a cancer survivor. At that point, with a diagnosed cancer, I need to be resilient. I need to put everything in to survive. But the day when my treatment was closed, resilience was never a topic for me again, because I don't plan that cancer is coming back. I do everything to avoid. I do making every topics to create more resistant topic for me, even, and I don't know if it's possible, a robust topic. So that for me is where the culture change starts, by creating this and really questioning what is happening. A lot of our organizations, so back from my private example, once again to the business, a lot of our organizations, when we give them a task, they don't question the task. They want to do the things right. Yeah. Execute. Like firefighters. There's a fire, you fight the fire, you go to the next fire. That gives your organization a problem. You can read psychology books on that. That's going to be burnout in organizations at one point. So that's what we try to separate them. Does it work for every time? No. Is it a long-term process? Of course. But that's how we do this. So with this, I think it's going to be hard to jump in off of that cancer example, right? I know. I apologize. I quote you. I apologize for doing that. Okay.
That's the problem. I should have gone first.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, there you go. I think just to add to that in a very small way, but I think, yeah, every business has a culture. We all have our, the way that we operate, and I think, without stating the obvious, it comes from the top. But I think, filtering that through the organisation again, it's about doing the right things, but it's also about recruiting the right people, the right values that you're recruiting into a business. And I think having a zero tolerance and that consistency, repetition, consistency of what you believe in. A culture isn't just something that you decide to push into a business. It's the way that it's everything that we are. We all have our own cultures, and I think it's about aligning the right people into a business to align with that culture that you believe in from the very top.
Also sound advice, absolutely. The other thread, Alex, I wanted to pick up that you brought up a few moments ago. It's a test of my memory, isn't it? Was digitisation. Mm-hmm. And as I think I said in the previous session for anyone who was in here earlier, in my role at Procurement magazine, every day I'm getting a new solution that is crossing my desk, mm-hmm. a new tool, a new method, a new add-on to existing systems, which is meant to solve this or improve that. Mm-hmm. How do you go about implementing digital solutions into your procurement and supply chain operations when there are so many new ones coming through? The AI explosion over the last matter of months. How do you go about incorporating that kind of progress into your strategy?
Good. I call it the savior problem, because there's a new savior every single day, and every new day we find this is going to be a solution for your problem.
You should see my email inbox.
Yeah, I guarantee you. I'm with you. I'm with you completely on that. And the interesting point for me is my company, Siemens, of course, we are a big company. We are a global company. We spend a lot of money in research and development in different fields. And then I have a history, not only personally being with that company, but also a company history of a lot of trials and errors. This helps us, of course, to create some kind of hurdles so that these first waves of I can solve your problem is going to be eliminated. Because it's always very, very tempting if someone is coming in and saying hey, I can solve that problem. A simple example, it's I get people coming to me and saying hey, I can create data transparency for you with my new tool. It's this is going to be perfect. Can you tell me how many different versions of SAP can you handle? Because I have in the field running 17 different versions of SAP. And that's typically the moment where they take their stuff and they're running out of my office. So I'm not saying that this solution, this is very good. We need to spark the moment. We need to create these ideas. We need to see what can help us. We need to do this cherry picking. I think it's very dangerous in believing that you're going to find this single solution that's going to solve all your problems, whether this is track and trace, whether this is any form from artificial intelligence. I had a nice discussion last week with a guy from Swarovski, and he told me they do all the demand planning with artificial intelligence, and I was just asking him how do you deal with the race to the bottom? And then there was silence in the room. And if you know the race to the bottom is the problem that these artificial intelligence services, they're going to go in countries where the IP rights are very limited. So this means if you don't develop your AI by yourself, you're going to have the problem that your data is going to be somewhere. And that are points where we want to create that hurdles. We still also have, as a big company, the advantage that there's a lot of controlling mechanism that makes sure that this is very selective. And again, like the lessons learned of the last 20 years will be my answer.
Yeah. There are millions of different tools, technologies out there, and I think I've undoubtedly scrolled past in the LinkedIn feeds, the emails as we all have, some absolute corkers out there that you perhaps look back and think, oh, maybe I should have acted on that. And so it's difficult. There's so many things out there. From our perspective within Cushman & Wakefield, one of our key pillars is technology, and that's from a what does the client need? What are they looking for? So we develop some in-house tools, but we also use external parties as well to support us with that. But for me, it really comes down to what are we trying to achieve? What's the goal? And to Alex's point, there isn't, to my knowledge, there's no single solution out there, hence 17 versions of SAP that will all do certain things in certain business units that if you dare turn one of them off, it'll, the world will implode on itself. So there are so many different varieties out there. So I think it's really focusing in on, what is it? What's the need? Whether that's internally or whether that's for a client, and then how does it fit commercially as well? The reality, just picking up on some of the things that I was talking about outside with a couple of colleagues around simply network design. There's so many tools out in the market for that now. There used to be 2 or 3. That's so diverse now, and there's so many different commercial models from, $250,000 for a license plus a user, etc., to, kind of off-the-shelf Excel plugin. It's what are you trying to achieve? It's horses for courses in that sense, from both what it is you want it to do, but also in essence what you can afford, or what the return is worth.
Well, I'm going to keep pulling on that technology thread, because we've mentioned AI here, and it's the could you say it, the technological elephant in every room? That's not even an expression. I apologise for that, but you know what I mean. It's part of every conversation at the moment. How useful do you feel it can be as part of strategy? Is it a case of incorporating it into it and seeing how it develops, or really putting it front and centre and trusting a lot of things that would normally be a human decision to this sort of technology?
Yeah. So I think from our perspective, and we're using, as I'm sure everybody in the room is to some extent, using AI, whether that's ChatGPT or anything else within a more embedded solution, we're using it at Cushman & Wakefield, and it's not replacing any roles, it's enhancing. And actually, an example, I was delivering a program out in Spain to one of our real estate development programs, and I just heard them chatting in the room around, I was speaking in Spanish, so I didn't understand a word, but I heard the words ChatGPT, and so I jumped in and said, how have you used it? And then before I knew it, I was delivering the session, and I was walking around the room, and I saw they had it up, and I think, oh crikey, here we go. They're going to unpick everything I've just said, because they've plugged it into ChatGPT and realised I'm making it all up. Thankfully not. But actually what they were doing was using it to enrich their understanding far quicker. So the things that I talked about, and yes, granted they spoke perfect English, but undoubtedly it helped them digest what I was saying into their local dialect. But it enriched their understanding, and it meant we had a far deeper conversation far quicker. And I think that's the same principle in any use of AI, machine learning, etc., that if we use it and we think about it in the right way, it can expedite our understanding, it can process information far quicker than the human brain can and distill it for us. I think we've got to be careful that we don't just rely on it and assume that it's telling us everything accurately. Many a horror story out there that I'm sure you've all seen. But yeah, I think it can play a role. I think we've got to be careful about where we play that role.
I want to go one quick step back on the digitalization. I think the interesting point is, and you can ask yourself, maybe we did this 2 years ago, we'll ask if I look on supply chain, what is digitalization in supply chain? Is it our purpose? Is it the lever? Is it a solution? Is it a savior? What is it? And what we were coming up is saying hey, we understand the supply chain. We want to optimize that. We want to make sure that we create customer experience, and we want to use levers. And one lever is digitalization in the different ways that we have. So we never go out and saying we drive digitalization, because we can't do this. Our focus is supply. We're moving boxes in the end and producing stuff, okay? And buying some materials, of course. So that's the first thing. The second thing where the topic of artificial intelligence becomes interesting for us. And we are we're very concerned on the topic of these black boxes. You don't know what is happening. You're not sure if like the decision or the result is really coming. Is it coming by luck? Is it coming by the artificial intelligence? So we have concerns on that. But what we learned is going to help us a lot. And this is what I said, like with my example on the different versions of SAP, is you can imagine that a company like Siemens has a lot of digital twins. Each digital twin has basically no purpose and does not make any sense. The magic happens when you are able to combine that. Combining in different versions over different regions always requires, whether you call this metaverse, whether you call these kind of working levels, whatever you want to call this, but it requires something that helps you to combining that in a kind of real-time environment. This is where we think in helping in a step that we are physically not possible, where we say like we want to concentrate on the activities of artificial intelligence. I think artificial intelligence itself is not going to solve any problems, at least as of today.
I know a few weeks ago I was interviewing Naya Shah from GEP for the September edition of Supply Chain. It's a very good read. Shameless plug. Was that shameless? That was really shameless.
That was a good.
And she described it as augmented intelligence, as in an addition rather than a solution, which I thought was a really interesting way of phrasing it. Would you sort of buy into that?
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
It's really like, and you see the same thing. Like you can look on different topics. There's always a lessons learned structure that needs to happen. Think about sustainability. Yes, it's good that we don't have any straws anymore in Europe. Nevertheless, that's not going to solve the problems of the world. Mm-hmm. So I think we're using a lot of these. We have problems or challenges. Let me call them challenges. We have challenges generated like over the last 10, 15 years. And now something comes in and we say, like, this is going to be fixed by artificial intelligence, no problem. Wait like 2-3 weeks, it's going to be no problem for all of us. And that's never going to happen because there's still human beings and there's still physical process behind. We will still move boxes, right? And we will deliver material and we will produce material and we will buy material. Yeah. So it's going to be a helper for us. That's the mind change that we're trying to bring in.
Absolutely. I like the word augmented. That's exactly, I was speaking to a client the other week around the marketing of an asset, a real estate asset, a warehouse. And yeah, the kind of go back 20 years and it's a flick through the Rolodex kind of, who do we know that might want it? And in essence, what AI is enabling us to do is do exactly the same thing, but just at a greater scale and in a slightly more sophisticated, if you like, way, because we're taking in more data points, and distilling it down. But that doesn't let the unit, doesn't speak to the person, have the conversation around how suitable it is for their operation, for their supply chain. So, yeah, augmenting it is augmentation is the word. Yeah,
it's just slightly more technical Rolodex.
Yeah,
What we will do is go to the room. I've got plenty more questions I'd like to ask, but I'd like to go to the room and see if there's any questions. If not, I will continue. But any hands going up for this one? We have one at the front.
Hi. Really good stuff. So thanks so much. Just out of interest, what do you think would be your main challenges over, say, the next 5 to 10 years in supply chain?
You want to start, or I write it down? And
I made the mistake of letting you go first last time.
Okay, so it's going to be like that. That's why I'm asking.
If you've got something, you go.
I'm just a visitor, so I'm trying to be polite. Okay. No, I can start, and I'll like. Of course, we have the overall areas. If you develop a strategy, typically you go like on the business strategy. There can be like a growth strategy. There can be like a competition strategy, depending on that. But then we have like the big areas that we have to consider as a supply chain, which is the topic of diversity. Not only diversity by gender, but like over function, understanding how organizations going to be involved by the time. The second big area, of course, is sustainability. The main part for us is decarbonization. We try to create a picture that, and I hate to say that, but supply chain will always consume resources. So we don't want to be painted. We want to be painted in a picture that says like we're going to save the world by having a net zero supply chain, because I think that's not going to be possible. But what we want to do is like doing everything to make it as best as possible. That's the idea. So it's the area there. We see a lot of these things in regards to what I said before, robustness. So creating supply chains that give us again some time to breathe. The time to recover is going to be a big thing. And the last area that I have on my agenda is the topic of globalization versus localization. And this has been easy said, and we know this all the last years. Every day there's a new news flash, what is happening in the world and where are the problems, and we are not going to run, everyone's going to be running left and then everyone's going to be running right. But there's a consequence if you take the ripple of what happens if we create more production in the US, for example. We're talking about, you can read that in the press, we're talking about a lot of investments that we do globally as a company. So what does this mean? So that's going to be changing our understanding of supply chain, what we call the new era. The last 10 years we had this cost optimization, maybe you know the wording global value sourcing, so going like to low-cost countries. You had the topic of cost and value engineering as an organization coming up, and now we're seeing like different areas. So that would be my 4 areas I would address.
Yeah, cool. Just to get it to 5, topic.
Just the cherry on the.
Yeah, well, we'll see. Yeah, I think for me, talent is another key one. I think in the UK alone, the things like the Novus programme, Generation Logistics have been set up recently to try and address that, government-backed organisations. But I think that is still a challenge if we look at, and again, I'm just referring to the UK, but it's certainly a European, if not global, challenge as well. You know, where does supply chain sit on curriculum, for example? You know, how do we get the right talent, particularly as it's, you know, supply chain is far more exciting than, you know, sort of sheds and trucks that everybody thinks. So how do we get talent into supply chain? And I think that's going to continue to be a challenge.
Yeah. I'll come back to the room in just a second, but would we put nearshoring into that category as well? Do we see that as being more of a trend?
Certainly a trend, yeah. We're seeing that. Shameless plug, we just released a report. Check it out on our website.
Well, I can't blame you for shameless plug. I went first.
But yeah, it's a thing. The reality of it is it's not as I'm sure Alex will testify to this. It's not as easy as people think. You know, the pandemic broke. Let's just move our sourcing strategy. You know, there's a hell of a lot goes into it both from an assessment perspective, but also a cost capex perspective, particularly around manufacturing. You know, it's typically capital intensive, so it's not as easy as just flick a switch and move things around. But certainly, you know, across our client base, we're seeing that happen. Yeah. Move.
Yeah, a big question for me is from which side do you come to that topic? It's like, was your strategy the last 10, 15 years offshoring, meaning like really go like to the end of the planet, and then like, okay, it's going to be critical right now, so my strategy becomes more like nearshoring. So still like, or do you start like from your home country and say like, okay, I'm going to find the next possible step? So that is a big question always that we have and see in there. I see it from 2 sides. The one is there is of course a cost and optimization topic in there. That's typically where the commercials jump on that topic when you see this on all your third-party services you may have, maybe order management in different areas that can be very successfully applied. The other thing that we experienced and are seeing is like that this helps us to change significantly processes. Because if I have everything in my house, in my room, it's going to be hard that I'm going to change that. If I'm going to challenge that by something or by a company, that's by sudden where we see the movements. So sometimes we need that topic, even if it makes maybe logically from a cost perspective, it will be an equal 0. It can be a very interesting topic to be the first step and then like building up on that. But I would not say that this is an overall solution.
Okay. Any further questions from the room? If not, I will continue. It appears, we do. If we just wait for the microphone just so everyone can hear you. Bear with me a sec.
Thanks very much. I'm James from SAP. So just on your comment about nearshoring and offshoring, I heard an interesting expression last week at this. I was at a global trade conference in Dubai, and they talked about friendshoring. which is aligning geopolitically.
Exactly.
So rather than looking at a geographical closeness, but geopolitical closeness. So getting out of China and other places that have poor labor practices or are not politically aligned.
Yeah. And what I experience also is like, we are still human beings. So we're driven by some kind of panic. It's maybe very little part of your brain, but it's there, I can guarantee. You have been trained for security, and you know, like when something's happening, a fire here, everyone knows how to exit. They have done this. EHS is coming in and all of this. Still, there's a little bit left of panic. So exactly what you said is like what you're going to have is the different levels. So you start like with 10 years ago, we didn't care as a company. It's like, hey, we want to be like, we are able to manage this. Now, geopolitically, we have so many uncertainties, and no one has solutions or methods to judge whether this is really coming in. Like, switch on your phone on Monday. They're going to say like, okay, there's a problem with the Ukraine. Next day, tensions between North Korea and the US. Next day is going to be tensions between China and Japan. It's like everything is coming. You don't know like at which point do you want to really put in your supply chain in that kind of risk. And so like, I have heard that also before. I like that idea because it's right at the moment. There's no other way you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah, another term, same thing, ally shoring, and yeah, it's the whole principle, and we call it nearshoring now in EMEA. My counterpart in APAC, it's the other end of the lens, I suppose. But I think it's about choices, and those choices aren't just a cost choice. It's geopolitical, it's a whole range of factors, sustainability, give yourself options. One client I was speaking to the other week talked about their 2x2 sourcing strategy. So everything post-COVID, they realised they had single points of failure, so everything now has a second option. A costly sort of solution to develop, but when we talk about cost, their cost of failure was greater than the cost of putting that in. So.
Yes, that was the ultimate test, wasn't it? And we do have time for one final question for the room, if there are. If not, we will move on to our next session. We just have one further one down at the front, Tracy. Thank you.
You're going to get your steps today, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Just as you were mentioning that within suppliers, sometimes it's for mature organizations as well. They don't have visibility within the sub-tiers. And as you mentioned, geopolitical. Within the sub-tiers, if you think that visibility is there, will it be easier to plan the sourcing and supply chain within in a more safer geopolitical way? Is what I'm trying to. Because I don't know, but most organizations sometimes what we see don't have that visibility within the end sub-tiers when a lot of disruptions happen.
No, absolutely. Absolutely, and one of the big points is like if you're a stock-driven company, of course, like the investors and the shareholders, they're looking for a return of investment, right? So there's always like a trade-off discussion you have. How much do you wanna? How much transparency do you have, and which decisions do you make? What I believe, and this is maybe also where artificial intelligence kicks in, is how do we get this transparency? How do we get this paths saying like, okay, that is a risky path, that is maybe a very easy or secure path. Because as an organization, even as a big organization, you will never be able to get that level of information. So yes, you're right. There's always a topic where you're starting to get into uncertainty, and I think like artificial intelligence can play a game changer in there. Is that a little bit helping into regards to your question? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, you're never going to get perfect visibility, whatever it is, whether it's supply. And I think you've got to acknowledge that and sort of, there was a time where maybe you kind of drew a line and said, well, beyond that's not my problem, so to speak. It is now, if only from a pure sustainability perspective, it's a challenge. But I think there's many more facets to go into. So yeah, I think you've got to accept that you're never necessarily going to get the full visibility, but I think you kind of got to acknowledge that and do your best to kind of know what you don't currently know, if that makes sense.
Okay. Thank you very much for the questions, everybody, and a big thank you to Alex and to Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.